are notifying are in all of them are not in a heightened state of alert. It made prudent sense for the Secretary to want to give them as much time to prepare to be on a shorter tether as he can, just in case. Again, I want to stress, particularly with the NATO response force, it has not been activated. It is a NATO call to make, but we have contributions to that response force, as do other nations. As I said, it's 40,000 some odd strong. Our contributions don't come near the 40,000 number. Other nations are going to have to contribute as well. But for our part, unilaterally, we wanted to make sure that we were ready in case that call should come. And that means making sure the units that would contribute to it are as ready as they can be on as short a notice as possible. Barb.
What's three quick things? What specific military capabilities do these U.S. troops bring to Europe, these 8,500? Second, could you say with some specificity what is the exact mission for these troops? And what will your measure of success be? How will you know when the mission is accomplished?
Yeah, so on capabilities, Barb, I touched this in the opening statement. Again, when we are able to identify the units for you, we'll do that. The reason why I don't have specific units today is because the units are being notified as well as family members, and I think you can understand we wouldn't want to get out ahead of that notification process. But broadly speaking, as I mentioned at the top, I mean, these would be additional brigade combat teams, logistics personnel, medical support, aviation support, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, as well as transportation, and maybe even some additional capabilities after that. Again, when we can identify for you the units, I think you'll see that they kind of cover the broad scope of those capabilities. Missions haven't been assigned. I mean, the Ready Response Force hasn't been activated, and so there's not a mission per se. This is about the Secretary wanting to get ahead of the potential activation and making sure that these units have the time to prepare if and only if they're deployed. And then you had when will you know success? Again, there's been no activation, so there's been no mission assigned. So it's very difficult for me to give you an up check or a down check on on what equates success. What this is about, though, is reassurance to our NATO allies. And we've been talking about that for quite some time, that we're going to be ready, we're going to be prepared to help bolster our allies with capabilities they might need. And we're going to do this in lockstep with them and with the alliance. This is really about reassuring the eastern flank of NATO, and it's also about, and I kind of covered this too, Barb, back to your question of success, it's proving how seriously the United States takes our commitment to NATO and to the Article 5 commitment inside NATO.
How will you know when your military goals are achieved?
Again, Barb, there's been no mission assigned right now. This is about getting troops ready. And back to what we're trying to achieve is a couple of things. Obviously, we still would like to deter Vladimir Putin and the Russians from another incursion, number one. Number two, it's to make sure that we're bolstering and staying unified with the alliance, that the alliance stays strong. And so the large bulk of the reason for this these prepare to deploy orders is really to make sure that we're ready to bolster the NATO alliance and to prove the solidarity of the alliance. Those are the two sort of big outcomes here. But again, no mission has been assigned to these troops. No deployment orders have been sent to them. What the Secretary has ordered them to do is to be ready to go, in some cases, on a much shorter tether than what they had before. Jen.
John, can you rule out sending U.S. troops to Ukraine?
That is, I think the president has already spoken to that. As you know, Jen, we already do have advisors and some trainers in Ukraine. They are still there at their work.
So if you're not willing to send troops to Ukraine, what makes you think that this is going to deter Vladimir Putin?
I think there's a whole package of things that the administration is looking at to try to deter Vladimir Putin from another incursion, including very severe economic consequences. This is about sending a strong message that we're committed to NATO, and we're committed to assuring that our allies have the capabilities they need in case they need to defend themselves.
Do you need a new AUMF to send these troops to these 8,500?
I'm not aware of any such requirement at this point. And again, we have long-standing commitment to the NATO response force. We are just one of many nations that will contribute to it. This is very much in keeping with the policies and the procedures that have been laid down for activation of the NRF. Again, if it's activated, and it has not been. David?
Are most of these 8,500 ground forces, would they go to the eastern flank? And have you put any units in Europe on alert?
I think, again, yes, I think the bulk of them would be considered ground forces, David. As for Europe, as I've said before, there are lots of force capabilities already on the European continent under General Walters, and I'm absolutely not ruling out the possibility that there will be intra-theater moves as well inside Europe to bolster NATO allies on the eastern flank, and that kind of gets at your second question, which is we're still in consultation with the allies about what they might need, and so I don't have any decisions to read out in terms of specific locations. But we certainly have made it clear to the eastern flank allies that we're prepared to bolster their capabilities if they need it. Again, I want to go back to a core foundation here. The bulk of the troops I'm talking about today are intended for the NATO response force, the vast majority of them. And that response force can only be activated by the alliance. It hasn't been. It is our contribution to the response force, and we want to make sure that they're ready to go. I think it's really important to keep remembering that. No deployment orders have been sent. No missions have been assigned. This is really about getting folks ready to go in case they're needed. Courtney.
So the ones that wouldn't be assigned to the NATO response force, they would be going in unilaterally on behalf of the United States to some neighbors, right? Can you give us any number, how many that would be?
Yeah, I can't do that right now, Courtney, but I mean, it depends on, it really depends on the need. And we're still in consultation with allies about needs. So I really would be reticent to give you a hard number right now, but we are in active discussions with our allies about any additional capabilities they might need on top of or outside of the NATO response force.
Does that include some of these intra-theater moves that you're talking about?
It
could. So there could be movement within EUCOM, U.S. troops that are moved going to NATO allies that would not be part of the NATO response force?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That is right.
Has there been any consideration or decision about pulling U.S. troops out of Ukraine as the State Department made the decision to pull some Americans out?
There's been no decisions about moving our trainers that are in Ukraine out. But as I said many times, we're constantly looking at the situation. We're going to do what's right for their safety and security. That's paramount to us. But as of right now, they are still on the ground in Ukraine conducting their advise and assist missions. And obviously, if that changes, we'll certainly let you know.
They haven't changed the number, right? The footprint remains the same.
It is exactly the same. Yes, ma'am. Let me go to some of the on the phone. I know there's lots of questions here. We'll get to them all. Jared Suba from Our Monitor.
Hi, Mr. Kirby. CENTCOM just put out a statement about the ballistic missile attack on the United Arab Emirates, saying that U.S. Patriot missile systems at Dhafra Air Base engaged. Is the department treating this as a potential attack on U.S. forces, or was this just done to assist Emirati partners? Can you give us some more detail on that?
Well, look, I don't want to get into intelligence assessments. I mean, this was obviously this just happened early Monday morning. So clearly we have troops at Al Dhafra. So we are certainly going to be looking into the possibility that this was directed at our forces. We obviously take that seriously. You've seen the CENTCOM statement. We responded to the attack, this ballistic missile attack, and we'll be in close coordination with our Emirati partners as we continue to to assess what happened and what we might need to do going forward. But I don't have I can't specifically tell you what the intent of the attack was, but we have to assume. I mean, it would be foolish for us not to assume that there was a threat to our people. And as you saw from the results, we took that threat seriously. Rio, Nikkei.
Oh, thank you, John. I have a quick question about China. The U.S. Navy is now operating 2 carrier strike groups in the Western Pacific, and they recently conducted a large-scale military exercise with Japan. Is this a message to China that China should not do something provocative while the U.S. is working intensively on the situation in Ukraine? Thank you.
We engage in joint operations to include maritime communications, anti-submarine, air warfare, replenishments at sea, cross-deck flight operations, the whole scope when we operate at sea, and particularly when we have the opportunity. And it's not unusual, Rio, for us to take advantage of the opportunity when you have 2 aircraft carriers in the same body of water to exercise together. We do this to strengthen our integrated at-sea operations and our combat readiness. And look, I just reiterate. Try this again in English. I would reiterate that all the training will be conducted in accordance with international law in international waters. Janie.
Thank you, John. I have 2 questions for one is North Korea, and one is South Korea and China. And the South Korean National Intelligence Service mentioned about the possibility of the North Korean ICBM test fire. And he pointed out that this was intended to pressure the United States. What is the U.S. response to the imminent test fire of the North Korean ICBM?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of test fire launches that haven't happened yet, but we've been very clear about our concerns over the advancing nuclear ambitions and ballistic missile capabilities of Pyongyang. Continue to condemn it and to call on the North to cease these provocations and to abide by international law and these Security Council resolutions, and to try to find ways to de-escalate the tensions. We've said very clearly, I won't speak for my State Department colleagues, that we'll be willing to sit down with them without preconditions. They've shown no desire to move that forward.
China justifies North Korea's missile provocations. Do you think that China's continued support for the North Korean provocations is part of the strategic competition with the United States?
I think you'd have to ask President Xi that. I mean, look, China's a neighbor. Direct neighbor of North Korea. They have influence in Pyongyang. We know that. They know that. Pyongyang knows that. And we've continued to call on China to use the influence that it has to support the international community and UN Security Council resolutions that China themselves have signed up for to help get them enacted and to support the sanctions, support them and to enforce them in a comprehensive, cohesive way, which the Chinese have not always done. Let me go back to. I'll go to you, Nancy, and then I'll go back to the phones. Go ahead.
Just a couple clarifying points. Is there a time limit to this prepare to deploy order, or is it open-ended? And would there then, if it is open-ended, therefore be a time when the Secretary would issue another order sort of saying stand down, essentially?
Well, remember what it is. It's telling a unit, or in this case, several units, to be prepared to deploy on a shorter tether than whatever it was before. In some cases, as I said, it was 10 days, now it's 5. And there's no time limit on that preparation order because we don't know, excuse me, if or when they would actually be activated and deployed. And to Courtney's question, I just want to stress again, the vast majority comprise our contribution to the NATO response force. There are some that we are advancing their alert posture that are simply unilateral, that we would consider sending on our own. again, in concert with allies. You got to talk to the folks that are going to host them and make sure that that's okay. But there's not a specific time limit assigned right now. But it is something that the Secretary is going to continue to look at, if certainly if not weekly, then even daily, to make sure that it's still the appropriate tether to have these troops on.
And then could you clarify for me, you mentioned that they would be in support of this NATO mission. Is there any point where they would be under a NATO commander, or would General Walters be wearing a different hat potentially when he takes command of them?
Well, I couldn't get into specific command and control here. Again, the response force hasn't been activated. But you're right, General Walters is the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, the head NATO commander. So ultimately, they would all be reporting up underneath him. But what the exact chain of command would be, it's difficult for me to say when they haven't even been activated. Let me go back here. Let's see. Kelly Meyer from News Nation.
John, thanks for taking my question. I know we kept talking here and saying, diplomacy is not dead here, but with the U.S. now preparing to send troops to allies on the eastern flank, is this just further agitating Russia? And we're telling diplomats' families to leave and Americans to leave. So is this moving on from a diplomatic effort to preparing for an invasion?
Not at all. Again, what we're telling these units to do is to be ready to go on a shorter timeline than what they were before. We are not deploying them now. We are not saying diplomacy is dead. You heard Secretary Blinken talk about this on Sunday in many outlets, that he still believes there is room for discussion and dialogue. I said that myself in my opening statement. We absolutely still believe that there's time and space for that. And frankly, the Department of Defense fully supports that as being the way forward here, the way to a solution that de-escalates the tensions. But it would be irresponsible if, given the indications that we have, that there is no intent by the Russians right now to de-escalate, and given that it takes a matter of time to get units more ready to go on a shorter time frame, it'd be irresponsible if we didn't think about making sure that they had plenty of time to prepare. And that's all we're doing at this point. Let's see, John Turpak.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I got you.
Okay, so to activate something like this, you'll probably need to have the Air Force in place. Have you increased the number of tankers at Mildenhall or throughout Europe? And do you anticipate that there could be a bomber task force deployment to Europe in the near future?
I refer you to EUCOM for things like bomber task force plans. I don't have specific things to talk about like that today. And again, please remember what this is about. This is about placing units on a heightened alert. It does not mean that they're going to be jumping on gray tails tomorrow and leaving. So obviously, if there's a need for additional air transport, we'll deal with that. Transcom is certainly Transportation Command, is tracking these prepare to deploy orders, and will obviously be postured as appropriate to support if needed, but that's if needed. All we're doing at this point is placing these units on a heightened alert posture. Tom Squitieri.
Hey, thanks, John. Good afternoon. Is NATO, in NATO's support of its eastern members as well as Ukraine, is that support more complicated today? Because as General Walters and EUCOM have concurred, there's not one, but now several folded gaps on possible invasion routes?
I'm going to try repeating your question because I'm not sure I totally got it, Tom. Are you talking about evacuation routes of Americans leaving Ukraine, and is that harder to do now? Is that?
Can you hear me okay? You hear me now?
I got you, Tom, but I'm not sure I got your question.
Okay, let me repeat it. Is the preparations by NATO and more complicated now to support its eastern members and Ukraine? Because unlike during the Cold War, when there was only one folded gap, there are now more than one folded gaps.
Well, I would just say, without getting into a historical comparison, and it's usually not useful to go back into history and try to find exact comparisons. The actions that Russia appears to be taking to threaten its neighbor further and to potentially violate further Ukraine's territorial integrity, certainly make things more tense on the European continent writ large. What I can tell you is that we remain committed to the alliance, and we absolutely remain committed to bolstering the capabilities of NATO's eastern flank to the degree that they desire that extra support. And it's not about. Look, I don't think anybody wants to see another war on the European continent, and there's no reason why that has to occur. This could be solved very easily by the Russians de-escalating, by moving some of these forces away, which they haven't done. And so NATO, as a defensive alliance, and it is a defensive alliance, has a responsibility to its members to make sure that they're able to defend themselves if needed, and that's the spirit in which the Secretary has made these early heightened alert decisions. Jen?
Just a point of clarification. If NATO is a defensive alliance and these troops, if they are activated, are defensive and therefore frontline NATO states, how does this protect Ukraine? How does it stop Putin from going into Ukraine?
It's designed to reassure our NATO allies, Jen. It's designed to reassure our NATO allies, and we are taking.
How does it protect Ukraine?
Jen, it sends a very clear signal to Mr. Putin that we take our responsibilities to NATO seriously, and we are also working inside the international community to implement severe consequences for Mr. Putin if he were to go again into Ukraine. Largely, those are of an economic consequences. So, I get where your question is. I'm trying to be very clear. This gets to Barbara's question about what success looked like. We obviously don't want to see another incursion in Ukraine. We are using lots of levers to try to communicate why that would be a bad thing for Russia to do. But number two, and it's not an insignificant number two, is to make sure that NATO stays unified and that NATO, our allies, are able to defend themselves. And that is what this decision is all about. It's about putting these forces on a heightened alert in case NATO needs them. David.
Is there a process by which this NATO response force is activated? Does there have to be a meeting? Is it a political decision, or is it just a tactical military decision? What is it?
I mean, well, it's a NATO decision, David. I'd refer you to NATO to go through the puts and takes of exactly how that decision gets made. But I'm sure it's going to have to be one where all the allies are consulted, and it's a political military thing. I think I better just refer you to NATO on the specifics of it about how they activate the NRF.
Does it require unanimity?
I'm going to refer you to NATO. Yeah.
John, two questions. One is, what kind of action would spark an order to deploy? What would be seen that could lead to a deployment?
Well, as I said, in the vast majority of these troops that we've put on prepare to deploy are to support the NRF, the NATO response force. And so, what would engender a deployment order to them would be a decision by NATO to activate the NRF.
Can you say what might activate the new NRF?
Again, that's a NATO decision. Again, please keep this in context. This is our contribution to the NATO response force. I won't speak for the alliance. I'd refer you to NATO to speak to how and what a decision to activate is made and under what circumstances they would make it. Our job is to make sure that if they do, we're ready to go.
Second question is, you've said a couple times that the Russians show no sign of de-escalation.
That's right.
Are they escalating? Are they adding any more forces, equipment? Are they from a week ago, from 2 weeks ago? Has their presence on the border enlarged or changed in a qualitative way that is escalatory?
Yes, it's gotten bigger.
Can you
Absolutely.
give us details?
I'd refer you to the Russian Ministry of Defense. They can speak for their force movements, but and we've been very clear from the podium that I'm not going to get into talking about their troop movements, but they continue to add battalion tactical groups to their western border, to the border with Ukraine, and in Belarus as well. The numbers there are increasing. So they have not only shown no signs of de-escalating, but they are in fact adding more force capability. Sure.
I'm unclear. The NATO response force, is the assumption that that's something that could be activated in advance of an invasion, or only would have been activated if? I know that it's a NATO decision.
That would be an alliance call.
I mean, what's your understanding? I mean, is your understanding that it's possible that this is something that could be called up, that these are troops that could be called up and sent forward?
Again, I'd refer you to Brussels court. It's really a decision for NATO to make, and what the criteria are for activating it is really for them to speak to, not for us. There's no, I don't know of a specific. I mean, it's a existing response force, right? And when it was established, it wasn't established specifically for the purposes of Russia invading Ukraine again. So I don't know that there's a specific limitation that they can only be activated, but that would be an alliance decision. That would be a discussion inside NATO and inside the political leadership of NATO. I just don't know. What we're trying to do is make sure that if it is, whenever that is, we're ready to go. Barb.
Can I go back on one thing? For the troops, the U.S. troops that might deploy, while they may get some kind of extra pay for deployment, can you find out for us whether or not they will get any kind of hazard pay, or i.e. combat pay, since they would be going into a situation where you clearly see potential hostile intent? Can you find that out for us?
I'll take the question. I have no idea today. Thank you. Joe Gould, Defense News.
Hey, John, thanks for taking my question. Thanks for doing this. You talked about troops being on high alert, but what kinds of equipment is being ready to participate in the NRF, which is, as NATO bills it, a land, air, and maritime force? And also, does the department have any plans for industry to surge production or deliveries of equipment that's already approved for, say, all the European allies? Maybe like the F-35s for Finland or Poland, or Patriots for Poland, Sweden, and Romania. Thank you.
Military sales, Joe, you're going to have to talk to the State Department. That's their province, not ours. As for the kinds of, I guess you were asking about systems, as I said, these are brigade combat teams, logistics personnel, medical, aviation, and aviation support, of course, all the kinds of logistical and sustainment support that would go to be able to keep these forces in the field for an extended period of time, transportation, command and control capabilities, communication capabilities, as well as the systems themselves. I think a lot more specificity will be clear once we can start identifying for you the units. We're just not able to do that today because unit notification is ongoing, and I think you can understand we wouldn't want them to find out from me at the podium that they're being put on a shorter tether. We want to do this the right way. But as we start to identify the units, I think the answers, specific answers to your question, will become a lot more clear. Jeff Selden, VOA.
Hey, John, thanks very much for doing this. Can you give an update on U.S. support for the Syrian Democratic Forces as fighting with ISIS in Hasaka is now extending into a sixth day? Are U.S. or coalition ground forces firing on, engaging with ISIS on the ground? Some reports from Hasaka seem to suggest they are. And is the Pentagon reviewing its force posture in Syria, given the size and scope of this attack? And separately, on Burkina Faso, what impact is the attempted ongoing coup there having on U.S. cooperation with the Burkina Faso's military on counterterrorism efforts?
Yeah, on Burkina Faso, I'm going to have to take the question and get back to you. I'm not aware of any impact right now, so let me just take that question. On coalition support for the Syrian Democratic Forces' ongoing efforts to deal with this prison break, and I would refer you to OIR for more detail here, but just broadly speaking, and I've already talked about this a little bit, we have helped provide real-time surveillance during the event. We have conducted a series of strikes through this days-long operation to include the precision targeting of ISIS fighters who were attacking the SDF from buildings in the area. and we have provided limited ground support strategically positioned to assist security in the area. For instance, putting Bradley fighting vehicles across access points to help block as obstacles. So there's been some limited ground support. Beyond that, I would refer you to OIR to get into more details. Tony Capaccio.
Hi, John. Two quick questions. Are the 8,500 a blend of active duty and National Guard, or all National Guard, or excuse me, or all active duty?
I think the large portion of them is going to be active duty, Tony. But I can't swear to you that there won't be reservists involved in this as well. Again, all this will become more clear once we're able to identify the specific units. But the vast majority will be active duty. Louis Martinez.
Hey, John. I'm sorry. I think Tony was going to ask another question if Tony wants to go.
Okay, John, is that all right?
Another one. My apologies.
Okay, John, is that all right?
Yes, sir.
How detailed a ground picture of Russian forces along the Ukraine does the Pentagon at this point possess? I mean, is it possible that we'll know, the U.S. will know if, in fact, an invasion occurs in real time versus a bolt from the blue that catches everybody by surprise, kind of like Pearl Harbor?
What I would tell you, Tony, is we're watching it very, very closely, and we believe that we have a pretty good sight picture on what they have there and what they continue to add, both in terms of the western part of Russia as well as into Belarus. We're watching this very, very closely, and obviously we're mindful of things that the Russians could do that would potentially give us indications of some sort of imminent incursion. We're not there yet, but we are watching for those indicators very, very closely. Go ahead, Louis.
Thanks, John. Just following up on what you said so far, that no decisions have been made and that the bulk of these forces are pegged to the NATO Rapid Response Force. Are they mutually exclusive? In other words, can the president decide that he wants these forces, now that they're on a shorter tether, to head to Europe for some kind of unilateral purpose without having to await NATO to even bring this up?
He's the commander-in-chief. He can make whatever force decisions he believes is most prudent. What he has decided is that our commitment to NATO is paramount right now, and that's why he approved Secretary Austin's recommendation that these additional units be put on a heightened alert, and that's where we are right now. Again, I won't speculate or hypothesize about future force deployment decisions that the commander-in-chief might make, but he obviously has the purview to shape force posture decisions as he sees fit, given the advice and recommendations that he gets from the secretary and from the chairman. Okay, I'll take a couple more. Yeah, go ahead.
Sort of following up on Jen's question earlier, if you're talking about reinforcing NATO's eastern front, do the countries on Russia's border, the NATO countries, say they are threatened by this Russian positioning against Ukraine, so that they need the reinforcements?
You would have to talk to each of those governments. We're in touch with them. I can tell you that they, by and large, again, I won't speak for other countries, but by and large, they are equally as concerned about what Russia's doing as we are and as so many of their other allies are. I would stress, again, that even in the event that we provide additional resources unilaterally, that is outside the NATO response force, and that's a possibility, even from inside Europe, it would be done in full consultation and coordination with a given ally partner nation. We wouldn't do it, you just don't go walking into another country just for the sake of being there. It's a thing you do in coordination and consultation with them. So to answer your question, in terms of whatever force deployments we might do, it would be at the request and with the support of a nation that did feel, for whatever reason, that they needed these extra capabilities.
But is there any sense that the Russian troop presence on Ukraine borders actually threatens a NATO partner?
I believe, again, I won't speak for other countries. I believe they have spoken for themselves about the concerns they have about Mr. Putin's potentially aggressive moves here. And we want to make sure, again, back to my answer to Barb, one of the key criteria here is being able to make it clear that we take our Article 5 commitments to NATO very, very seriously. Yeah, Jim.
John, what effect does the Secretary's decision have on the 8,500 service members concerned? I mean, I imagine all leaves and passes will be canceled right now. Are they packing up gear? Are they anticipating having that?
Well, they're just being notified today. Some of these units are already, just by nature of who they are and where they are, on a shortened tether. You know that. What the Secretary decided to do in many of these cases is shorten it even more. So from, in some cases, 10 days prepare to deploy, you got to be ready to go in 10 days, to now 5. So they will, it depends on the unit, but they will have to make whatever preparations they feel they need to make to be able to meet that 5-day commitment. That doesn't mean that in 5 days from now they're going. It just means that they need to be ready to go in as little as 5 days if asked for. So they will be doing all kinds of different things to help get them ready for that. And again, it would depend on the unit, whether it's maintenance on vehicles and systems, whether it's getting some things pre-positioned and packaged up and ready to go. Certainly, there'll be for the forces involved. I'm sure personal readiness things that they have to do, and that's again one of the reasons why I'm not giving units today, because the units are getting notified, and we want to also give them time to talk about this with their families, so that their families are ready for this potential, and I say potential, deployment order that could come. But what's happening now is just getting them ready on a shorter tether. Not all of the units are already on such an advanced PTDO status, and so it will take them a little bit longer to get into a heightened alert posture. That's why we're doing it now, so that they have ample time to prepare. Okay?
But is it correct that no one is deploying in the next 72 hours?
Today, we're not talking about deployment orders. We have no deployment orders to speak to, Barb, and I think I'm just going to leave it at that. All right. Thanks, everybody.